Welcome everyone to the Roxbury International Film Festival Q&A for what we're calling Homage to Our Ancestors program block of films and our RoxFilm at Home series. We are so excited about these films. I mean, I have to say, Chris, like I think your film was the first film I watched in the film festival and was like, oh my God, like, what is this? Like, I don't even know what, like, this is like, how come I don't know about this? So we're here to talk about your films. We're here to talk about like sort of why you created these films, why the importance of that. So the first thing I want to do is sort of go around and have each of you talk a little bit about your films. And then we'll get into the discussion about the impact and why you did what you did and why you made movies that you did. So Chris, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting the film, of course, and inviting us to this Q&A. It's been a little while since I've made the film, so it's really, I appreciate the opportunity to sort of go back and think about some of the questions that you've asked. Yeah, I mean, I made Mud Frontier on it was sort of a lark, I guess, in some way. The main protagonist in the film, Ronald Rael, had come to Cooper Hewitt, which is the Smithsonian Design Museum, where I work as sort of the video producer for exhibitions. And he gave a lecture, and I was recording the lecture. And during the lecture, he said, next summer we're going to 3D print a house out of Adobe. And I looked over at my colleague, Cristina de Leon, who's the curator of Latino design. And I said, let's film that. That sounds really cool. Typically the museum doesn't do feature length films. And in fact, it was a lot of the leadership was quite hesitant to allow us the time to do that. And the funding came from a grant that Cristina wrote. And it was a very small budget. But the idea was, let's go to the San Luis Valley and watch Ron and his team create these 3D printed structures. And the idea was that it was going to be a short process video, 15 minutes. But as we sort of explored the topic and started to learn more about the history of the valley and of the region, it just became much bigger. And soon we were looking at sort of an outline where it was going from, ancient Egypt to 3D printing technology. So it was kind of a much larger piece that sort of just expanded as we learned more. And I thought it would be it would be a shame if we couldn't expand the story, if we couldn't tell the story. Our role as a design museum is to tell the history of design. And what better way than to sort of tell this sort of modern iteration of architecture and design, but through sort of the lens of history and culture. And so we pushed really hard. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and that actually gave me a lot of time at home to edit. So, I continued to, do the regular day-to-day work, and also spent many, many hours a day editing and working on the film. And during the filming, I said one of the trips that we went to, Ron and Virginia, his partner, was they asked me, would you be willing to come down to the border, because we have this project that we're doing that's time sensitive. It's not really related to the subject of the film, but maybe you could just come down and film us, and we'd just sort of like invite you. And I said, sure, what is it? And they said, well, we're going to insert a seesaw in the border wall.
Yeah, that was so cool.
And I was like, that sounds pretty crazy. And I'm pretty sure that Smithsonian would not be down for me doing this. So I sort of did it on my own time. And I'm so glad that I did. And it ended up becoming part of the film. And in fact, Yeah, we just the museum just opened up an exhibition called Designing Peace last Friday, and we actually have one of the seesaws in the museum from that day. So
Wow.
sort of full circle. Here we are, almost 3 years later.
I mean, it's so amazing your film. I mean, for all of your films, I think that we all we we all struggle with like that we're from somewhere else, right? And how do we make sure that we're supporting we're supporting that ancestry, we're supporting that history, whether it's your history, whether it's someone else's history. And then, for you as a filmmaker doing this work for this Indigenous population and for your subjects, we're all constantly thinking about that. And I think we think about that as we get older. And I think we think about it as our history is starting to get wiped away from legislation for the ridiculousness of what's happening right now in the U.S. So I want to talk a little bit more about that because it's a little bit deeper conversation. But I want to go to Adam because your story, Bounty, you've been with us. You did Dawnland. You're really doing a lot around preserving the history of Indigenous, especially Native Americans here in Massachusetts and the United States. And I think that it's what you're doing and the work you're doing is really important. So can you just talk a little bit about your film?
Sure, thank you. Yes, I'm Adam Mazo here in the territory of the Massachusetts people, just a few stops down the Orange Line from where the Roxbury Film Festival takes place, and right on the edge of Roxbury and Jamaica Plain. So I'm a local and co-director of a film called Bounty, made in collaboration with Penobscot people who appear in the film and who were with us every step of the way in making the film. Which is about a scalp bounty proclamation that put a price on the literal scalps and body parts of Penobscot people, of their ancestors. I'm Ashkenazi Jewish, I'm not Indigenous, I'm not Penobscot, but several of our colleagues are, and they're the ones featured in the film. And the film tells the story of one particular scalp bounty proclamation, which was signed in the old State House in Boston, which folks who know Boston know the building. It sits right on top of State Street Station. That the building has been there for a few hundred years, and up until recently was not reckoning with the reality of the fact that documents of genocide were signed in that building. Policies of genocide were implemented in that building on the so-called Freedom Trail. But it sort of makes us wonder, whose freedom are we talking about when we talk about the Freedom Trail in Boston? When we talk about revolution, whose revolution is it? The film centers Penobscot people entirely reading that hideous document with their children in the room where it was signed, and to really bring forward the fact that Penobscot people are still here despite the genocide perpetrated against them by settlers like me. Penobscot people are still here. And there were dozens and dozens of documents just like that signed in that very room, and many, many more that were enacted across this region, the Dawnland, aka New England, and beyond. And so one of the things that we hope people will understand from watching Bounty is that the Dawnland, which was rebranded as New England, truly was the scalping capital of the region of the United States. Folks are more and more familiar with lynching being a largely Southern phenomenon, but also hopefully more and more aware that that was not unique to the South. But scalping was the way that settlers created terror and made it so that incentivized poorer white folks to go after their neighbors and hunt and kill them for money. And we hope that people can watch the film and see that Penobscot people are here today, part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, and that there are indeed Indigenous people here in the East, even if we don't necessarily know as much about them as we ought to, because the erasure of Penobscot people has been so intense, and Eastern Woodlands people, Indigenous people in the East in particular. But they're here living among us, and they are wanting to tell their stories. And that's part of why we wanted to collaborate with them on Bounty. We learned about the Scalp Bounty Proclamation through the making of Dawnland. the feature film that we did about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that investigated the taking of Wabanaki children through the child welfare system. And in presentations that the Truth Commission and Wabanaki Reach would do around the history of child welfare, one of the documents they would show was the Phipps Bounty Proclamation and say this document was used to target Indigenous people. And our team decided to dig deeper, and we found some close to 100 different bounty proclamations just sitting in colonial archives, some of them known, many of them not known, and we found many hundreds of scalp bounty claims. That is people saying, I saw you issued this bounty and now I'd like to be paid. And here's the body parts to prove that I did it.
Unbelievable. I mean, that's like, and these are the kinds of stories for all of you and the other filmmakers that are in this block. It's why it's so important for you as filmmakers and for us as audience members to be able to watch these films, to share these films with a wider audience. So much of all of this history is swept under the rug. So much of it, as generations go, we haven't necessarily been great about talking to our elders about things that are going on. So you guys are like, archaeologists and you're filmmakers and creating that opportunity for us to live in that space and learn about that space. So Valeriya, your film too is sort of, has the same sort of homage to our ancestors and really interesting take on it though, about, moving away from that, your ancestral homeland, or moving away from that, for your children, but then understanding of what was missing in their lives and needing to go back. Can you talk a little bit about your film?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Valeriya. I'm director of Mawhialeo te Alowha, and it's a short documentary filmed in New Zealand about a Tokelauan family that had to move from Tokelau to New Zealand in the 70s. And Tokelau is a dependent territory. It's part of New Zealand, and it's one of the smallest nations in the world. And it's pretty much situated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And yeah, right now it's in danger of climate change, and it's in danger of completely disappearing. So the film sort of raises this question of, where do you go if there is no more physical place to go back, to your roots, to your ancestry, to your family. And yeah, it's a story of the elderly couple. They're called Meli and Avito Lifosio, and it's pretty much looking into their decision to leave the atolls with their son and move to New Zealand in the 70s. And the reason for that was that one of their sons was blind. So they were pretty much persuaded by a Kiwi doctor that it would be best, if they took the chance, moved to New Zealand, maybe, helped the son's health. That didn't happen. And they settled in New Zealand. They haven't seen their parents that they left in the atolls for, I believe, over 10 years. They couldn't go back for nearly 43 years back to Tokelau. So they sort of settled, by choice, but it is a question of, maybe who would have known how life would have been if they decided to stay on the islands. Like, it's such a big decision, like it's such a big question where, where the kids would be better off. And it's also one of those things that when they moved there in the 70s, that looked nothing like Tokelau. Everything was different. It's not like me moving somewhere, like me going to Canada or US tomorrow. Things are different, but they're not that different. For them, it was a completely, the language, the culture, just like everyday sayings, like, getting around, like just things you need to sort out. So on top of everything that they were going through, they just couldn't really, figure out how the hell on earth they're going to do this. And it is it also raises a question of this whole relationship between New Zealand and the atolls and the whole colonial history that preceded that, and how Polynesian and Pacifica communities are being treated in New Zealand, how they see themselves. Are they part of a New Zealand, like a larger New Zealand, whole cultural mix in life, or do they still feel that they don't really belong there? And I think film touches on that, because at the end, Meli says that I want to die and be buried in Tokelau, even though she always sort of escaped to really answering the question of, do you feel like New Zealand is your home? She wouldn't really say anything, but I feel like when she says, I want to be buried where, where my ancestors come from and in the physical place of our culture and language, I feel that answers quite a lot and it hints on quite a lot. The film is also, half of it is in Tokelauan. We tried our best to make all of it in Tokelauan, but I think it's, sometimes they would just talk English because that's the second language they use in New Zealand. So sometimes it was totally unconscious, even though I said, I want, to pay respect to the language. I want to preserve the language, because when I tried to look into, any films, any archival footage, it's very little what's done in Tokelauan, or a lot of it is still from the 60s or 70s with a very, white Pakeha New Zealander perspective on the atolls, like a lot of other, island footage that there is of Pacifica communities. So yeah, we tried, and we worked with a lovely translator from the community who is also Tokelauan, who also moved to New Zealand. So she helped us translate a lot of the footage and also work on some of the nuances. And she helped with the title as well. And the title was interesting because it literally translates to whispers of love, but it also can mean, love to your parents and to your ancestors and to your community, which I thought that ties the whole film quite well, even though you might, for those who know the meaning, of course, for the Tokelauan community. But yeah, and it's really, it was just an honor, to meet the community, the family, be welcomed, and being able to spend a lot of time with them before we even started filming. And I thought that, because to me, I'm not from New Zealand, I'm a Ukrainian, and I was doing master's MFA program in New Zealand, and that's when I met them. And I always try to look for ways how we can create bonds with communities and people that, that look nothing like you. And it was quite, at times, I thought it was just unusual that a lot of people that grew up in New Zealand have very little interaction with Tokelauan communities, with Pacifica communities. I couldn't quite understand that, because I thought, well, I just got here and I see these people, like they live here, they're your neighbors, kids go to school with you, but there's just such a little kind of interaction on a daily basis, such a little exchange of cultures, that I thought just supporting them and giving them a place, to share.
I think it's really interesting that, for the three of you, that the films that you made are not about your cultures, right? That you made this choice and this decision, and you saw, you have your own cultures probably to unearth and whatever. So much of your films are about home and about what home means to this Indigenous population. So what inspired you to do that? What inspired you to say, and I'm going to go to Chris, but I'm just really curious, because our audience will probably want to know, what inspired you to say, I'm going to tell this story of these particular people about their home and about the loss of their home. And Adam, you spent your film career doing this as well. So can you just talk a little bit about that? And what are the challenges of telling those stories that aren't your culture?
Yeah, that's it's obviously a very sensitive and it could be fraught, I guess, if you aren't sensitive, right, to being not from there. And I think that it takes for me, it took a lot of conversations that just were not part of the film, that were coming to Ronald's community, and being open and curious. The thing that I sort of learned along the way was that I wanted to help tell this story because it was interesting to me, and it was something that I not anyone that I knew about, right? Indigenous slavery is not something that we learn in school.
No.
And in fact, I didn't know that it existed in the way that it did in the Southwest. So I felt like, well, I mean, this story hasn't really been shared widely. And I had created this, or had sort of fostered this relationship with Ron, with his family, and with his neighbors. And it was based on mutual respect, curiosity, and the sort of platform that I have, as a filmmaker and, as a representative of a museum, right? And there's a lot of sort of to unpack about sort of representing a museum and what do museums, what role do museums play in telling the story of Indigenous cultures. And so there were, and that's one of the sort of great benefits of being part of the Smithsonian, is that we have 2 museums dedicated to Native Americans. And so we have experts and folks that we can talk to from a lot of different Indigenous communities in the Americas. And we did, and we reached out to them and we said, how can we bring you into this process? And so that was part of our process to tell the story, was to get perspectives from folks that were that study the history, but also to spend time in the San Luis Valley and share sort of, you mentioned that, yeah, we do have our own cultures to unpack.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I am sort of conscious of, or really try to not do, is extract stories, as a white male filmmaker going into a place that is not representative of my culture, and to sort of extract a story and come away with it and show it to the world, was something that I did not want to do. And I wanted it to be a mutual exchange.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a really interesting, Chris, because it's about appropriation too, right? And not wanting, and I don't think any one of your films, you wouldn't know that, I mean, we're looking at we see the films, we watch the films, and then we're like, oh, that's the filmmaker, right? So I think that it's I think that comes across, that it's really a genuine and authentic conversation about this Indigenous community, and really sort of like thinking deeply about how come people don't know about this.
Yeah.
And if I have, and this, I'm just thinking this through, that, you all have the ability to, through what you do, whether you're a student or whether you're working at a museum, or whether, this is sort of the work that you're committed to around justice, like Adam, that you are authentically bringing these stories forward, and we can definitely see that. So we don't have much time, but I do want to give Adam, the opportunity, because I think Valeriya talked a little bit about this too, about why, and being, Iranian and coming in and doing that. So just really quickly, can you just, like, the challenges, like why you choose to do this work, why you're bringing these stories forward? We are grateful for you, all of you, for doing this.
Thank you. Keith Tanamuk is his name. He's one of the commissioners that was in Dawnland on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he's said many times in various conversations, now you know. And the thing is, once I knew,
Yeah.
I couldn't not do anything, right? And it's also, I feel like we as settlers, or as non-native folks, or whatever, whoever we are, wherever we are, we're in that place, and we have a role in telling the story of that place. And especially with Bounty and the story of settlers scalping Indigenous people, we as settlers have a role in making sure that story gets told as a way of reckoning with the past and a way of acknowledging our role in it. I think that cross-cultural collaborative filmmaking is what we're trying to focus on, and make sure that we're, ceding power or also using power to elevate these stories, to amplify hidden narratives. That's what we're trying to do with our work at Upstander Project.
Yeah, I mean, if so when you all get the opportunity to see each other's films, you're gonna be like, wow, I can't, yeah, this is I'm hoping you say that this is a great block. But you know, with Upstander Project, it's, yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to have allies and to have people that have the opportunity and have the capacity and have the ability to tell these stories. And for all of you seeing this, like Valeriya, seeing that you're in this place and you realize, wow, this is a really interesting, because I think it's very true. I think that for immigrant populations here as well, people come to this country for a better life, but then as you get older, it's like, what did I give up? What did I lose in not raising my children in my culture? What did I lose by not having those conversations? And I think it's important that you all of your stories are giving people the opportunity to see a part of history that's not told in mainstream media, right? That's not told in the schools. And is that your intention? This is probably my last question that I can ask, because we're running out of time, but I'm going to start with Valeriya. Is that your intention? Is that what you want us to take away from this? And then we'll go from Valeriya to Chris and then end with Adam.
It's definitely part of it, because to me, I mean, that was something that stood out. I said, well, I've never heard of Tokelau. That wasn't something that was part of my mental map, right? It's something, I mean, that's something as a Ukrainian, whenever I've been, I try to share and talk about my culture because I want people to take away something from it. So, you know, having lived in different places, and especially, you know, right now, having to had flee my own country, I actually feel there is like another level of connection there is between me and the family, and you know, we still keep in touch. And I think there is, yeah, that's, I just wanted people to know. I was happy if someone would watch the film and come talk to me, or they would go online, or they would look up something, just some, like, it doesn't have to be a lot of things, but something, or maybe even seeing the way about their own communities or diverse communities or marginalized communities where they are. And maybe, you know, just go and have a discussion, go say hello, go learn about their culture. And I think that's why, you know, Mele is so great at it, that even though they did spend most of their life in New Zealand, she is so committed to preserving the language, doing workshops, teaching younger generation about Tokelau and their culture and, you know, the ancestry that, you know, when I met her, I just couldn't, like, that was it. I saw that, you know, the story, I mean, it's unique, but it's also very universal. And this is the least that we could do, is just, you know, make a film and also, you know, have the community have this project, because they did ask, what are we getting out of this? Which I thought was that was a good conversation to have, because yeah, and you know, they were, can we show it? Can we have it? Can, you know, can we send it to people on the island? And so there was this transparency right away that they could come to us with these questions, and, you know, we would give them the answers. And, you know, if there was something that we were not sure, we could always approach them, that there wouldn't, you know, any kind of misrepresentation or anything that they didn't want to be included in, things of that kind. Yeah.
I mean, that's where that authenticity comes in, I think, from all of you. And Chris, what do you want us to take away from Mud Frontier?
I mean, I think there's so many things to take away from the film. Sort of the biggest takeaway, I think, is to understand that Indigenous technology, Indigenous cultures are not gone, and they are continuing to inform and can continue to inform and educate and inspire, and that the sort of there's a lot of nuance that's lost when we talk about Indigenous culture and the history of colonialism. And I think that from the film that we learn that the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized is incredibly difficult and complex, and continues to sort of inform every day, you know. Yeah, I think just, and you know, there's a lot of other sort of lessons that can be learned from the film about about the use of technology from ancient times to today, and how the mixing of these things is creating new histories.
And that's the incredible thing, Chris, is like you bring that out so beautifully in the film. It's sort of like, those of us who have kids that are older say, hey, I just heard this new music, and you're like, yeah, that's from like the 1970s. What, really? So it's really great to it's really great that, yes, that we are going to learn that indigenous culture has created these ways of building, and this language, and this from food to architecture to all of that we can't forget that. And because of you all making these types of films, we get to say, hey, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this structure comes from this. So Adam, what about you? What do you, we can take a lot away from Bounty, oh my God, colonization. But what is sort of the one overarching thing you want us to take away?
Thank you. Yeah, there's an incredible teacher's guide that covers so much, available on the Upstander Project website. And I think, the big thing, there's two big things. It's how scalp bounty proclamations were used systematically by the English colonial authorities to exterminate indigenous people. And that is a story that is largely unknown or erased, and that their ancestors survived, and people like our co-directors, Don Neptune Adams and Molly and Dana, their ancestors survived, and they're still here.
And that's it, right? We're all still here. We're here. We are generations of all of those people that came before us. That's a beautiful way to put it. So Alison, do you have anything else to add? Thank you. Alison is the co-director of the festival, as you all know, and my partner.
And I had no idea I was on camera, so I apologize if I did.
You didn't do anything. I would have told you.
I did. Okay, I was good.
But she did have a question for you.
I did have a question. So I'm just curious. We like, our audience also likes to know what you're working on now or what you're doing next.
So Chris, why don't we start with you? I know that you guys all just finished films. I know Adam's working on probably 10 films. And Chris, you just did a major feature, and Valeriya. So yeah.
Well, Mud Frontier was my first feature. And I'm actually thank you. I'm in process of making a new film about a black maple syrup farmer in upstate New York. Who cool. is an abolitionist and grows food and makes maple syrup as a means to bring liberation to his people. So that's
RoxFilm in person 2023.
2023 or
We're
the 25th.
Working on it. Yeah. Well, and it'll
No
be
pressure.
A short next year.
It's a short or a feature?
It'll start as a short next year.
Okay. Well, whatever we can do.
Thank you.
Adam?
I'm in the early stages of development with one of my Bounty co-directors, Tracy Rector, whose mother is Jewish and whose father was Black and Indigenous. And I mention that because we're working on a film about people who identify as Indigenous and Jewish. Tracy and I are both Jewish. She's Indigenous and Jewish. And there aren't a ton of people out there, but there are quite a few, and want to explore kind of how culture gets formed in families and in communities, and what it's like to be descended from two different oppressed peoples, oppressed in different ways, and kind of how that combination of Jewish and Indigenous cultures blends together, and what that looks like in people's families and people's lives. Really try to focus on positive, happy stories. I was listening to a podcast today of a Ojibwe Jewish chef who self-identifies as a Jindian, and said he's like, I love fry bread and I love gefilte fish. So we want to explore those kind of positive, joyful stories and profile a lot of people in that way. So maybe RoxFilm, I don't know, 2027, we'll see.
Woo!
All right, we're here.
That's a lot of pressure, just like Chris's pressure to get his short film to us by 2023. Great, that sounds amazing. Valeriya?
Yeah, I've taken on the role of an editor for a feature documentary. It's set in Cambodia, and it's about a Cambodian family fleeing Khmer Rouge regime in the 80s to the US. And it's sort of a story of them, the whole family trying to come to terms with it. And they travel back to Cambodia and they're trying to restore, the passage that they took to escape to Thailand and then finally make it to Chicago. So I'm challenging myself to get through all the footage and all of the Khmer parts of it, but I think it's also, I mean, it's a very heartbreaking, but also a story of a great resilience. So I'm, diving to a slightly different part of the world, but
Yeah, but it's very interesting because it mirrors your current situation. This total resilience and happening. So I just want to let you know, like for us, for RoxFilm, and we stand in solidarity, and I know you probably hear that all the time, but yeah, for everything that's going on in Ukraine right now, and for your future, and for capturing and making sure and preserving your history, because that's a really important part of everything that we should all know and continue to know about. So, and thank you for the work.
No, thank you. I appreciate. Thank you.
So Chris has just put something in the chat about watching this great film about a Cambodian family. So make sure you check that out. Well, we don't have more time. See, this is why I like doing the Zoom, because we could talk about so many great things. But I don't want to take up your time. You guys have been very kind to give us this opportunity to have these conversations with you. We're so excited to have you part of RoxFilm this year. We know that our audience members are going to love all of your films and learn so much, just like Alison and I both learned when we were screening them. And we wish you nothing but the best of luck in your film festival journey and your filmmaking journey. And if there's anything that we can do to help support the work you're doing, we are here to do that.
Thank you so much for this and for that.